A few days ago, our president, theoretically the strongest political person in the world currently, whether we like it or not, retweeted, as you're all aware, 3 videos, all of them derogatory towards Muslims, all of them inciting fear in the broader public against Islam and Muslims. He is the president of this country. On his personal Twitter account, he has over 45 million people, the bulk of whom are already antagonized towards Islam and Muslims. And this person, rather than bringing about peace, rather than bridging gaps in cultures, exacerbates a very tense situation by propagating 3 videos, 2 of which are completely false. 2 of which have nothing to do with us. There was a fight that somebody videotaped, and then somebody falsely said one of the people was a Muslim migrant attacking, a local person, whereas it turns out both of them were, from that ethnicity or whatnot. Another was a complete fabrication. The third was an isolated incident where one crazy Muslim did something, and then he said, this is the religion of Islam. The same day, in Sweden, a member of parliament, an elected, essentially senator, said in a public lecture that Muslims are not fully human. Muslims are not fully human. While all of this is going on, Ofsted, which is the largest and the most authoritative branch of the British government that deals with regulations regarding schools, issued a decree that every muhajjiba girl that would come to any public school would have to be questioned. Was she being forced by her parents to wear that hijab? This was enacted by Ofsted, alhamdulillah, 2 days ago. Because of great pressure, they lifted it. But it was going to be enacted that every single muhajjiba girl, 7-year-old, 5-year-old, 9-year-old, every girl would have been questioned by superiors. Was she being forced? By the way, no one would have questioned a girl if she came in a miniskirt. Are you being forced to wear that? No one would have questioned a girl if she wore any type of clothing. But if she's wearing haya, if she's wearing dignity, if she's wearing decency, she would have been questioned. Are your parents forcing you to do that? And I can go on and on about so many legislations that are being passed, or false videos being spread, or the paranoia that we're currently witnessing against our religion. And brothers and sisters, believe me, all of you know me. My speciality is aqeedah, it's tafsir, it's seerah. My speciality is the religion of Islam, the classical sciences. I would much rather restrict myself to those than come and talk about these other things. Because honestly, these things are somewhat terrifying, they're depressing. But the only reason I'm here today, I just caught a flight today, I have another flight in 2 hours. The only reason I'm here is that, in my humble opinion, brothers and sisters, every Muslim needs to understand we're living in very dire situations and circumstances. We're living in a time and a place where, unless we take action, the next stage might be very, very terrifying, and we ask Allah's protection. Those who don't study history are doomed to repeat it. And frankly, many of us have not studied history. Many of us have not studied what happened in Nazi Germany, not in 1941 when the Holocaust took place, but in 1921, for 20 years that led up to the Holocaust. Because you cannot get a Holocaust, you cannot get mass incarceration of Japanese Americans that took place again in the 1940s without a sustained, systematic campaign to dehumanize a group of people in the broader public. You cannot instantaneously start killing people en masse, as what happened in Nazi Germany, or rounding up people of one ethnicity en masse, as what happened in America, unless and until you desensitize the broader public to what is going to take place. And Muslims, I'm sorry to be so alarmist, but what we are seeing right now, that is a necessary precursor to a future Holocaust or a future concentration camp. You cannot get to that stage without what we are seeing right now. And I'm sorry to burst your bubble, but somebody has to say this, because we don't live in a time where we can just clap ourselves and pat ourselves on the back. Somebody has to speak the honest truth. Many of us are living sheltered lives. Many of us don't understand how dire the situation is. The election of this president is but one symptom. One symptom. You know, we come to these conventions, we see all of these hundreds or thousands of Muslims. We go to our masajid. You're living in Atlanta, the fourth largest concentration of Muslims in America. So you get a sense of, oh, mashallah, we're a majority. No, I'm sorry. Muslims are a dismal minority. And these statistics that you hear, 5%, 6%, subhanallah. No, I'm sorry, but we need to be academic here. No survey that is done properly has ever shown that Muslims even reach 1% of this country. Sorry to burst your bubble, but we need to be very clear about the facts here. We are less than 1% of this country. That is something that should really and truly make us reflect that when the broader public has made us such a staple issue, every second congressman or senator, every third issue is about Islam and the Muslims and Sharia law. And yet we are so minuscule in this country. That is a precursor, may Allah protect us, to something that I don't even want to mention or verbalize. So unless and until we understand that our children and grandchildren are under threat, physical threat, unless we understand that our safety, not just our iman, which of course is always under attack, but the physical safety of us and our children is on the line. And each and every one of us has to do what we can. Then subhanallah, if we don't help ourselves, who else is going to help us? And that is why today, I'm not going to speak to you as a sheikh, as an alim, as somebody who knows the tradition. No, allow me to speak to you as a professor, as somebody who's going to teach you a little bit about history, about what happened. I'm going to give you an example today about what happened in this very land. This very land, barely 70 years ago. And that is the mass incarceration of Japanese Americans. Most Muslims are vaguely aware of this, but we don't really quite understand. And I'm going to basically go over three basic points. Number one, brief history of what happened to the Japanese Americans and how that took place. Number two, the psychology of why the broader society and politicians are making us an issue. And then number three, what do we need to do from a worldly perspective? Obviously, from a religious perspective, that's a different lecture. Iman, taqwa, relationship with Allah, that's very important. And nobody should ever trivialize that. And that is there. But things don't happen just when we go to the masjid. You need to do something beyond the masjid. You need to do something beyond dua. Dua is important, salah is important. But even miracles, you need to do something to get them. So very quickly today, and time is limited, and I am not exaggerating. I have literally from here, my bags are in the brother's car. As soon as I get off the stage, I'm going to go to the Atlanta airport and fly away. I literally come to these places because I strongly believe that Muslims need to hear the truth in a manner that, not to terrify anybody, but to make us think a little bit more critically. Firstly, knowledge. Secondly, psychology. Thirdly, what we can do. As for knowledge, one incident to help illustrate, to help you understand what is going on. I already said, you cannot mass incarcerate 100,000, 200,000 people without what? A systematic program to dehumanize that group. The Japanese Americans who were incarcerated in the 1940s, up to 500,000, 250,000. 250,000. How many Muslims are in Atlanta, by the way? Roughly. Whole of Georgia, 150. So more than the Muslims of the entire state were rounded up. And by the way, you know, we just say these words, rounded up. Do you understand what it means to be rounded up? In the middle of the night, military police uniforms. The army, not the police, sorry. The army came knocking on the doors of the Japanese Americans. And Japanese Americans, by the way, were also decided by quota laws. What percentage of your parents were Japanese? What percentage of your grandparents were Japanese? And who told the army where these people live? Their neighbors. Their neighbors called up a hotline, said, oh, we have a Japanese next to us. We have a Jap next to us. They had derogatory terms. And the army would come, knock on your door, say you have 20 minutes, pack your bags, you're going. You and your wife, your kids, everybody. No choice. Throw in a van, be thrown in this prison, basically an open-air prison, for 4.5 years, not knowing how long you're going to be there, not knowing whether you're going to be executed the next day. You're literally, everything stopped. Your job, your career, everything. This was here in America, by the way. Many of those people that were in those camps are still alive. Some of them are one example, there's a famous Hollywood actor who played the George Takei in Star Trek. He was of the concentration camps. You have videos of elderly men and women after the Trump ban on YouTube saying, look, we're not going to allow this again. This happened to us. Meaning they're still alive. We're not talking about, 200 years ago. This is 1 generation ago. And by the way, this incarceration was fought legally on multiple levels. Finally, one case reached the Supreme Court. In a very famous landmark ruling, the Supreme Court said it is permissible and allowed in extreme circumstances to suspend the law. The Supreme Court of America made it legal to arrest without any charge and imprison in these concentration camps without any crime those 250,000 people simply because one of their grandfathers or grandmothers had been Japanese, 1/4. They had laws to decide how much is Japanese, simply because one of their ancestors was Japanese. And it was only later where the Supreme Court apologized, the government apologized, Congress apologized, the president apologized. This took place decades later. Didn't help the people that were actually incarcerated. Now, as I said, that did not come out of the blue. It took over 50 years of dehumanizing another race. It began, believe it or not, in the 1890s. 100 and something years ago, Americans were not scared of Muslims, of Arabs. Believe it or not, 120 years ago, there was another scare. And they called it the yellow fear. I'm not making this up. This is true, you can look it up. The yellow fear. The fear was against which race? The Chinese. Why? Because tens of thousands of Chinese workers came to America legally, and the whites basically went into a panic. Oh my God, all of these people are coming. And they called them the yellows. This is a derogatory term they called them. And by the way, these hard-working individuals, they took jobs that Americans did not take. What was the main job that the Chinese did? Who knows? Build the railroads. The infrastructure of this country, the railroad infrastructure, was built by the Chinese Americans. For the most manual labor, for the cheapest price, the most efficient, they did the job. But broader society rebelled. Broader society said, oh my God, all these people are coming. Different race, different religion, different ethnicity, different language, different culture. And their numbers were nothing compared to the broader public. What is 20,000 compared to the broader public of America? But that fear was hyped up. It was exaggerated. And what happened? Number 1, social media campaigns against Chinese Americans. Social media was not Facebook. Back then it was newspapers. Back then it was publications. Back then it was books. Back then it was gazettes. Gazetteers would be distributed. And smear campaigns were directed against Chinese Americans. Publications began drawing Chinese people in very derogatory terms. Exaggerated, slanted eyes and the Fu Manchu stereotype. Those of you that know magazine, the childhood, Marvel Comics Fu Manchu character. The Fu Manchu character, by the way, was created in the 1920s as an exaggeration of an evil Chinese, warrior, whatnot. That was, in fact, one of the tactics. Magazine articles began perpetuating negative stereotypes about the Chinese people. Their culture is different. They smelt weird. They bred like rats, one of them said. The New York Tribune mentioned, and this is from the New York Tribune. I have obviously all of these quotes, but time is limited. I can't reference all of them. The New York Tribune wrote that the Chinese are simply not a civilized group of people. They breed like flies. They don't have the basic etiquettes of cleaning. They stink. Their women are prostitutes. Their men do this and that. And they kept on using these derogatory terms over and over again. Books were written with titles such as The Yellow Fear, The Attack of the Orientals. And the broader public was made to feel that there is an imminent threat from these Chinese Americans unless we put a stop to it. So once you start fomenting hatred, what's going to happen? Politicians, rather than stand up and fight against that hatred, the majority of politicians, and this is across the world, not just in this country, by the way, politicians, generally speaking, I'm sorry to be so blunt here, but generally speaking, politicians are corrupt people. That is a rule of law across the globe. The honest politician is the rare oxymoron you come across. Generally speaking, politicians are not people of principle. And when they find any avenue to boost their popularity, they'll use it. Correct? And this isn't just American, any politician. So, what did politicians in the 1920s do? They banked on the check of bigotry. They rode the wave of xenophobia. And they began propagating even more crazy views. And guess what? The people loved it and voted them in because of it. In California, a senator ran for office in 1920. I have his name here. A senator ran for office in 1920, if I can find his name here. Dennis Kearney. Dennis Kearney won by a landslide when he ran for the position of senator in California. And his motto was, "The Chinese must go." That was his slogan. Forget healthcare, forget union rights, forget anything. The Chinese represented, again, less than 1% of the population of California at the time. Less than 1%. But the slogan that he used to win with the landslide victory was what? The Chinese must go. Does that sound familiar? Deja vu, anybody? How much are the Muslims in America? Less than 1%. What did our current president say that boosted his popularity? We must ban all Muslim immigrants until we figure out what the hell is going on. You see, politicians bank in on that hatred and bigotry. They understand what their people want. And there's nothing new here. Once politicians are going to bank in, they have to then cash the check. How do they cash the check? By showing that they've actually enacted laws. And so, yes, 120 years ago, laws were enacted against the Chinese Americans in this country. Laws that prohibited marriage from white women and Chinese. Not that Chinese people were marrying white women left and right. Obviously, the race of that time, there was already racism. But, by the way, footnote here, there's always this trope of an innocent white lady being attacked and ravished by dark men, the savage. And we white American men have to protect our women. So they passed laws that Chinese people cannot marry white women. Became illegal. They passed zoning laws. Where can Chinese people live? This was all legal back then. They passed laws excluding Chinese people to migrate until finally in 1917 came the final blow. And that was, the official title was called the Chinese Exclusion Act. It was informally called the Yellow Act. And again, I'm not making this up. You can find this in any textbook on law. The Yellow Act. 1917. What happened? Congress passed a law that effectively banned all migration from any country in the world other than countries that are Caucasian. Italy, France, Germany, Ireland. And that's why the stereotypical American immigrant that came here in 1920 and 30, they're coming from white-skinned Caucasian European countries, right? Mexicans didn't land on Ellis Island, Germans did. Chinese didn't come to Ellis Island 1930s and 40s by and large. The Irish did. Why? Because it was a racist law that forbade anybody of a non-white complexion basically from coming to America, except with a whole bunch of hurdles. Obviously, people trickle in. But as a rule, as a general rule, the only people that could come were people of a particular race and color, and these are the Caucasian Europeans. Now, by the way, footnote for us Muslims here, before 1917, Muslims were migrating to America. The first batch of Muslims that came here were whom? Who knows? The Syrians? The Russians? Well, the slaves, obviously. The West Africans, that's the first batch, but they didn't migrate. They didn't land on Plymouth Rock. Plymouth Rock landed on them, okay? They didn't migrate here. They were forced to come here. That was the first batch of Muslims. Let's never forget that. Let's never forget, the first batch were the African slaves, our brothers and sisters that were forced to come here. The first batch of voluntary migrants, they came from Ottoman lands and from the Caucasus, from the Balkans. And they came 1880 onwards. And the first mosques that were built by these immigrants, and they were from Ottoman lands, from what is current Syria, Lebanon, Turkey, the Balkans, some of them from the Soviet Union, some small groups of Indians came. They came in small batches, in the tens of thousands, and that trickled down in 1917, it stopped. Because of this act. However, the government did not intend to ban Muslims. Their intent was to ban the Chinese, but we were a secondary casualty, right? Because when you're going to prohibit everybody except the Caucasians, so obviously we are also banned, even though it wasn't intended at the time. It wasn't a major threat at the time. We were not really in those numbers that they're concerned about us. And that is why from 1917 until 1963, Muslim immigration was barely a raindrop, a trickle. Hardly any Muslims came during that time frame. If you ever meet a Muslim who migrated before 1963, they have a very interesting story. Okay, because from 1917 to 1963, what happened in 1963? Ted Kennedy repealed the Yellow Act. Go Google this. Ted Kennedy's repeal of the Yellow Act. The Yellow Act of 1917. Ted Kennedy, the Kennedy, the brother of the JFK. Ted Kennedy repealed the Yellow Act in 1963. That's when, after that time frame, you could come here in the 70s and 80s if you were a student or whatnot. And that's where most of you, almost all of us, my father came, most of you, some of you came in the 80s, some of you, you're born here, your parents came. They came because the Yellow Act was repealed. Remember that. Because this act that I'm talking about was rescinded, abrogated, and it was repealed in 1963. So when you have this popular legislation and the government then passes an act, what else happened that we're seeing deja vu? When America began preaching this hatred of the Chinese, other Western countries latched on. New Zealand, Australia, Germany, England, they all began an anti-Chinese campaign. Even though there were no mass migrations from China to England. But Western culture found it convenient to scapegoat this group of people and to create a common enemy that would unite them, because the enemy of my enemy becomes my friend. So when you create an enemy and all of you agree, that's the bad guy. So there's a camaraderie between all of you now. And another thing that takes place, it's called the echo chamber effect, or psychologists call it the confirmation bias. When you hear what you already believe, it makes you certain that what you believe is true, even if the source is ridiculous. It doesn't matter. Fox News is a classic example. When you keep on perpetuating the same lies, the people begin to believe it. So when Americans hear, oh, Australians are also saying the Chinese are bad. When the Australians hear, oh, people in England are saying the same thing. When the British hear, oh, the Germans are saying the same thing. That's a confirmation bias, an echo chamber. It becomes amplified amongst everybody. And we see this taking place again right here and now. Every Western country without exception is talking about Islam, Sharia law, women in Islam, homosexuality in the Sharia. Every Western country without exception has made this a major issue. The French parliament is debating the burqa and then they ban it. The Belgian parliament debates the niqab, even though there are barely 400 women that wear the niqab. I calculated 0.000001% of Belgium wears the niqab. And the parliament debated the niqab. What an important issue when 0.00001% of your population is affected by it. And they banned the niqab. Switzerland has a grand total of 4 mosques with minarets. 4 mosques. And the Swiss parliament passed a bill that banned the construction of mosques with minarets. What is going on here? Confirmation bias, echo chamber. When one group begins, the other groups follow suit. And then what can happen when everybody is whipped up into a frenzy? I have 10 minutes left, I know. 10 minutes, I'm done. When everybody's whipped up into a frenzy, what happens? What happens? Then the legislation begins. Then the legislation begins. And what is that legislation? In Nazi Germany, you know what that legislation was. And I didn't talk about that, by the way. In the 1920s, the Jews were dehumanized. In the 1920s, the caricatures that are being given of us in the media, they were given of Jews in Germany. They are a fifth column. They're out to destroy you. If you don't take care of them, there will be nothing but Jewish law in Germany. And Americans actually believe, many of them, that unless they stop us, Sharia law is going to be enacted here in America. Look at Fox News. They're terrifying their own people. And I say this clearly, they are the real terrorists because they're spreading terror amongst the population. They're terrifying their own people and they're making them believe the Muslims are going to come and kill you all, behead you all, the infidels. Even though we're less than 1%. Statistically, logically, rationally. But hey, when you whip up a frenzy, you don't think rationally. And brothers and sisters, unless we stop that stereotype, unless we stop that hatred and fear, as I said, we're already seeing all of these steps. Everything that I mentioned, except the final stage. The stereotyping, the caricatures, the mass media, the politicians, the laws that are being passed, the echo chamber, all of this, check, 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 check. What's the next step? Rounding us up and then doing something physical. And we're just sitting here as if nothing is going on. And that's why I am here today, brothers and sisters, because I genuinely, I'm not going to say I'm scared because that's Allah Azza wa Jalla, but I am worried. And the wise person worries. I am concerned for my safety and the safety of my children and the safety of your children. Those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. God forbid, brothers and sisters, we ask Allah's afiyah, but if another disaster or calamity, similar or worse in magnitude to what happened 14 years ago, were to happen today, God forbid, may Allah protect us. But just imagine the consequences. Think about that, brothers and sisters. Yes, we have crazy people amongst us. Yes, we have these jihadist groups and we have to speak against them. But all of us know they don't exist amongst us. We are not the guilty party. We know that. There's no radical imam, jihadist preacher. There's no secret Al-Qaeda cell anywhere in America. Yes, there are crazy people in every society. But when one of us becomes crazy, we all have to suffer the consequences. And when one of theirs goes crazy, and in Las Vegas shoots 55 people, in Connecticut mows down 30 children, in Boulder, Colorado kills 50 people in a theater, not a single person of their race or ethnicity suffers the most trivial backlash. We know the double standards. We have to deal with reality. The hypocrisy is clear, but that hypocrisy is not going to save my children and your children. So we need to then get to the second and third stage. And I talked about quickly psychology and then action. Psychology, why is this happening? Why do you think these politicians are whipping up this frenzy? Why do you think social media, Fox News, is making us a scapegoat? I will tell you why. Listen to this carefully. Yes, there are some people who are genuinely convinced that we are a threat to their country. But the fact of the matter, the undeniable fact, and this is well documented, the people that are propagating these lies know full well that they are lies. The people that are spoon-feeding the presenters on Fox News, the people that are writing the script for banning the Sharia in 22 states, they know all too well, they're educated people. They don't believe for a second that American Muslims are going to harm this country. They know that, it's common sense. So then why are they doing it? Some of you will say, oh, they hate Islam. I'm sure they do. But it's more than hatred, brothers and sisters. It is, listen to me carefully, political expediency. How so? You see, it's very simple. And by the way, these are tactics that Nazi Germany used. Go read the sources. Go read textbooks. Go read what Hitler's main advisors said. Himmler was one example. Himmler was one of the propaganda ministers under Hitler. And others, they explicitly used this as a tactic. What was the tactic? You teach the people that this community is a threat to their safety. You exaggerate their threat. And then you portray yourself as the knight in shining armor who will protect you from that threat. Who comes out the winner? The politician. You see, this is the point. Listen to me carefully. Why? Because we cannot respond to hate with hate. We genuinely need to understand that person who hates you, that neighbor of yours, that colleague of yours who's scared about you, he's a brainwashed, miskeen soul. The real people that are evil are the ones that have fed him those lies. Not the guy that's at your level, not your worker, not your neighbor. The real evil people know it's a lie. Your neighbor doesn't know any better. It's your job to sympathize with your neighbor. I know it sounds crazy, but you need to put yourself in his shoes. The guy actually believes that you are a threat to his children. What do you think he's going to do? Other than be scared of you, be angry at you, be hostile towards you. He actually believes you will destroy his way of life. That's what he's been taught. If you're going to respond to that hatred with hatred, you've proven his point. You see, it's very convenient for the dominant power, for the dominant civilization to create an imaginary monster. We are the imaginary monster. It's very convenient to exaggerate this bogeyman and say, oh, the Muslims, oh, the Muslims, oh, the Muslims. Then when everybody's terrified, who's going to protect us? Who's going to protect us? Donald Trump comes and says, I am going to protect you. Then what happens? He gets elected into office. I mean, Muslims, I'm sorry to be so blunt here. Do you really think that Donald Trump, whose business partners are rich Saudi playboy businessmen, who deals with the Muslim world all the time, he doesn't know any better? Do you really think that he did not know that General Flynn would flip on him 2 days ago? And so 4 days ago, he sends out those tweets against the Muslims? Do you really think that's just a coincidence? It's distraction, brothers and sisters. Distraction, plain and simple. Look at your healthcare, look at your economy, look at your debt, look at your education system. Oh, the Muslims are coming, the Muslims are coming. It's distraction. And it works amongst the uneducated masses. Are you guys following me here? It works, and we see it at work. So our job is not to respond to hatred with hatred, to bigotry with anger. It's not going to work. Our job is to understand these people have literally been brainwashed, and our job is to deprogram that, brainwash them, to get that fear out of them. And the only way we can do that is to genuinely empathize. Put yourself in their shoes and see that from their worldview, all of this is going on. You need to then make it different. So this leads me to my final. So the psychology was very simple, brothers and sisters. It's a vicious game of chess. And those of you who play chess, you know, sometimes you have to sacrifice a pawn in order to protect the queen or the king. Okay? The politicians are using us as a pawn. We are a pawn in a vicious chess game. I'm sorry to burst your bubble. The reason they're doing this is not because they hate Islam. That's not the main reason. The reason they're doing this is because it is convenient for them politically. It's because it empowers them in office. It allows them to be distracted from all of these scandals, from everything that's happening. It allows them to create a distraction and concentrate on things that they want to do while the population thinks of something else. And unless and until you understand that, we're going to continue thinking, oh, they're doing this because they hate us. No! We're not that significant that they're going to hate us. We're too small in this country to pose a real threat to them. But it is a convenient distraction, which leads me to my final point, and then inshallah ta'ala, I will ask your leave. The final point is very simple. What can we do? Now, what can we do is two talks. Number one, religiously. Number two, from a worldly, dunyawi perspective. Religiously, what can we do? I have given dozens of khutbahs about that. Yaqeen, ikhlas, tawakkul, sabr, dua, all of these dhikr, that's all there, been there, done that. You need to listen to those, and all of your imams and preachers are talking about that. And I'm not saying this to trivialize, but that is a necessary component. But it's not the only component, brothers and sisters. Even miracles of Allah, you have to do something. When Musa was standing at the Red Sea, Allah didn't just say, okay, just stand there and close your eyes and make dua. Allah said, take your staff and hit the Red Sea, then the miracle is going to happen. When Maryam is giving birth, she is hungry, she is thirsty. Allah didn't say, okay, wait there, I'm going to cause dates to fall from the sky. Allah said, shake the tree, then dates are going to fall. Even miracles, you have to put in the effort. So yes, religiosity is essential. And I've spoken about that in many lectures. The question is, after religiosity, what else can be done? I'm going to mention 2 or 3 points and then inshallah I'm done. Number one, the most important factor that every one of you needs to understand. Your circle of influence, your sphere of impact, only you can stand in those shoes. Your friends, your colleagues, your co-workers, your neighbors, nobody else in the world has that circle of influence other than you. They're not going to come and listen to Yasir Qadi's khutbah. They're not going to come and listen to your local imam. They're not going to, no, you are their main conduit to Islam. You represent to them Islam. If you fail in representing Islam to them, then Islam has failed in their eyes. In their eyes. So make it your point to show every single colleague of yours and every single neighbor of yours the beauty of Islam, the honesty of Islam, the virtue, the rahmah, the mercy, everything. You need to become a role model citizen and a role model Muslim, because whether you like it or not, you represent our Prophet ﷺ in his eyes. And I know that's terrifying. Wallahi, it's terrifying. But it is an undeniable fact. And if you can impress that individual with your akhlaq, then Fox News has no power over him. And I say this so many times. Our Prophet ﷺ was known as a Sadiq before he was ever known as a Nabi. He was called Al-Amin before anybody ever called him a Rasul. Akhlaq speak louder than theology. Akhlaq speak louder than creed. Akhlaq speak louder than anything you believe. So make your akhlaq the best amongst your friends and colleagues and co-workers, and make it a point to do it for the sake of Allah, and Allah will bless you to do that. That's point number one. And honestly, that is the most important. Point number two, you also need to understand, and I need to understand, that Islam is more than just rituals and ibadat and theology. There is a social aspect of our religion that necessitates that we stand up against injustice across our societies. Our Prophet ﷺ, from the very early, and I've spoken about this again in my seerah and in many lectures, from the very early message of Islam, he spoke out against female infanticide. Did he not? Did he not? Is that a theological issue or a moral issue? Moral issue. From the beginning of Islam, he spoke out against racism. Think about that, racism. I have a whole lecture about this. He spoke out against racism in this first year of the message of Islam. Now, somebody would have said, well, racism can wait till the end. Let's get the Quraysh on board first. But no, racism is a moral issue. He spoke out against economic injustice, and I have a lecture about this as well, about the issue of hilf al-fudul and whatnot. Point is, we as an American Muslim community need to take a vested interest in our broader society around us. Crime is an issue that everybody should be concerned with. Hunger on the streets, homelessness, women's shelters, the healthcare system, the education, the pathetic schools. If 0.1% of our national budget, as is used to spend, what is our budget of, is it 60 trillion or something? I forgot right now. The amount that we spend on wars, if 0.1% were to be spent on our schools, it would increase the efficiency of our schools by 1,000%. 0.1% that we spend on wars if we were to spend on schools. Now, imagine if in the public eye, there was an advocate that's angry about how bad Atlanta's schools are. And he comes on TV, he's doing protests, and his name is Abdullah with a beard, or her name is Fatima with a hijab. And they don't bring in Islam. But Islam is demonstrated because they're concerned about the poor level of education. You see, the problem comes for many of us, local causes are simply not Islamic. I'm just going to be blunt here. When we raise funds for Syria, Palestine, Kashmir, Timbuktu, Botswana, mashallah, tabarakallah, money flows in. And I'm not saying we shouldn't donate. Let's donate to that. But when we want to raise funds for a local soup kitchen, Want to raise funds for a local shelter for women. Raise funds for a local cause. SubhanAllah, money just dwindles out. As if there's nothing to do with us. To put it simply, if the broader community does not see you as being a part of it, then why should it help you when you need its help? Simple as that. And by the way, I'm not doing this just because we want their help. I'm saying as a religion of Islam, it is a part of our duty to be a part of our society and to speak up against the ills that are taking place. Currently, we're witnessing these Black Lives Matter, movement, police brutality. Muslims, unfortunately, by and large, are not playing a major role in these things. They should, because it is an issue that affects all of us, and we should speak out against that injustice. So that's the second point. Third and final point, and obviously ties into this, we will fight the system within the system, using the system, which is the American way of things. Sometimes we will fail. We have failed on occasion. Some of our brothers and sisters are languishing in jail, and they shouldn't be, right? And we all know we don't want to defend a real terrorist, an actual person who wants to harm people. Khalas, lock him up, throw him behind bars. But what we're angry at, and all of us know this, is the fact that many people are targeted who are not terrorists. Many people are framed. This imam in Florida is a classic example, and you don't know much about him because, again, his story, I met the sons. The more you hear, wallahi, it is a distressing situation. He's 78 years old, he's half blind, he's a diabetic, and he's on the phone, and he's using the word Taliban. That's it. And he's giving funds to a madrasa of orphans in his village, in the Swat Valley of basically Pakistan, attached to Afghanistan, right? And they sent in informants, they staged, they this and that, and he didn't understand everything, and they put him up, and they set him up, and they gave him life in prison, and he's now languishing in jail. 78-year-old man, taken away from his family and children, doesn't even speak English. The whole trial was about translations of Dari and Pakhto into English and how they mistranslated it. This is the reality that we weren't unfortunately able to help the gentleman, but his sons, alhamdulillah, are all out. The 3 sons are all out, alhamdulillah. Have some success, okay? Another case, again, I can go on and on. And again, the reason I'm here, it's not my speciality, but wallahi, imagine, may Allah protect me and you. Imagine if that was you. Imagine an innocent phone call is twisted. And that is exactly what is happening across this country. Things that are completely innocent. I can tell you about. Can you believe, I'll just give you one example, and I kid you not, wallahi, this shows you how evil and crazy these people are. In one particular trial, they translated something as a nuclear bomb. And the brother's like, what is this? And I swear to you, you know what it was? It was the book Riyadus Salihin by Imam al-Nawawi. And al-Nawawiyya, right? It can be translated as nuclear. And so they took Nawawi, the guy doesn't even know Arabic, or he's intentionally doing it. And he translates Nawawi as a nuclear bomb. And this gets to trial, and the guy has no clue, what am I doing here? Oh, you were talking about nuclear and this and that. What nuclear? Nawawi. And they translated this as nuclear. Because again, the Arabs understand Nawawi can mean nuclear as well. But of course, Imam al-Nawawi is, who is Imam al-Nawawi, right? So again, this shows you, and I know unfortunately of many such cases. May Allah protect me and you. If this were to happen to your brother, your sibling, your cousin, who are you going to call? After Allah Azza wa Jal, you're going to make dua, then what? MLFA is at the forefront. And I've seen firsthand what they're doing, and it is truly impressive. Their list of who's who in terms of caliber of people that they have on board, mashallah, tabarakallah. What more do you want? They've done the work for you. But here's the point. Mr. Charles Swift, he shut his law firm. I don't know if he told you this or not. He shut his law firm and he moved to Dallas to work for the Muslim community. Now, do you think Mr. Charles Swift is going to charge us $5 an hour? Let's be fair. Put yourself in his shoes. He deserves every penny. He's made his career. But he's given his career up to give it to us. And he's going to demand, and you know what? He deserves it. It's going to save our children. And the same goes for all of the other people that are working for the MLFA. Final point, brothers and sisters, many of us don't understand, and I'm going to say something very clear here. To pay these attorney fees, they are zakat eligible. This is the fatwa of Sheikh Qardawi, and it is the fatwa of Mufti Taqi Uthmani. I spoke to Mufti Taqi personally. A few months ago, I was in Karachi. I visited Mufti Taqi in his office. I asked him a series of questions. And one of those questions was, can we use zakat money to give lawyers that are helping Muslims that are unjustly put in prison? He says, of course, these people are al-gharimin. And he quoted one of the 8 categories. Of course you can. I said, Mufti Sahib, you know that lawyers, they charge an arm and a leg. Where's the brother, right? They charge an arm and a leg. You know, they're not gonna, it goes, yeah, but it doesn't matter. They're helping the Muslim community. See, many of us, we don't understand zakah. Zakah, yes, you give it to the people that are hungry. That's one category. Fuqara and masakin, 2 categories. There's 8 categories of zakah. 8 categories. And the other categories, in order to cause an impact, you don't just give $5. Mu'allafati qulubum, another category. You give a massive amount to save Islam. And the same goes for these types of cases. It is permissible, brothers and sisters, to give zakat money to the lawyers that are defending these cases. Why? Because one case will have an impact across the country. One case will secure the right for 6 million Muslims. Do you think that that's a joke? That is our protection. And that's why fuqaha and ulama, not ignoramuses that don't know anything and they think they know fiqh. Real fuqaha, they understand. You can give zakat for these types of cases. And this is the fatwa of both Shaykh Qardawi and Mufti Taqi Uthmani. And frankly, it is the fatwa of anybody that has a knowledge of fiqh. I don't know any scholar, by the way. I don't know any scholar who would say you cannot give zakah. Any real bona fide scholar, not somebody like me or you or average graduate, real alim at a global level who understands the situation is going to say you cannot give zakat for this. So may Allah Azza wa Jal open our hearts and minds to help this organization and to do what we can.